Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Mafia and Gangsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do this video here, which is going to be a special dedication video to a film that just celebrated its 30th anniversary. Can you believe it? 30 years ago this week, this film came out. This is a very important film within the world of Mafia and Gangsters. I'm sure there's a pretty good chance that you've seen at least, if not some bits of this movie, the movie itself altogether. And not only that, but probably have seen it multiple times as well. And even though it's been out 30 years, it is still relegated to a lot of imitations today. Lots of people talking about it, lots of memes associated with it as well. It's still as important today as it was 30 years ago. And of course, I'm talking about this. Goodfellas. This is the movie that pretty much inspired a whole genre when it comes to the world of mafia movies and films, at least in a very particular way. More on that here in a minute. But I wanted to go ahead and talk about it here as a special dedication because of its anniversary and because of its importance still within not just film, but also within Mafia and Gangsters. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here, and then I'll also give my own opinions on the film, how I came across it, and then some of my other personal stuff associated with it. For starters, I wanted to mention this. Actually, with this series here, Mafia and Gangsters, the very first video that I did actually tied to this film as well, and tied to the circumstances surrounding it. In this case, it was the video that I made of Michael Spider Gianco, which I'll include the link for it below, but it pretty much just started off this series. The reason I wanted to do this whole series as far as Mafia and Gangsters is because I wanted to relegate it to some of the lesser known people within that world, some of the ones that maybe people haven't heard about, but it's a good way for myself to share this information with others. So as far as the Goodfellas film and as far as the circumstances surrounding it in real life, all of that stuff basically led to me starting this particular series as well. So that's why, again, I wanted to talk about this video here. But as far as Goodfellas, 30 years, 30th anniversary, well, if I could recall the first time I ever saw this film, it was probably back when I was a teenager, but more along the lines of something on TV. There was no chance I ever saw it in theaters. Like when it first came out, I was too young for when that occurred. But later on, I do recall seeing bits of it here and there on good old Rabbit Ears TV. You know, the kind that had the basic channels associated with it, those NBC, CBS type movies. But I remember it was like heavily edited. Like there was no chance I would have seen all the good stuff that would have been a regular version, like the R-rated version of it. So I think I saw it afterward, like on VHS, like the full movie itself, and then that's when I truly got to enjoy it. And of course, I was instantly just fascinated by it. I mean, from the very beginning, that line about Henry Hill stating wanting to be a gangster, that just instantly hooks you. I mean, what kind of line is that? That's not a line you don't really hear whenever you start off with a film, but here it was, essentially breaking boundaries and going into all new versions, all new categories when it came to filmmaking, and what a roller coaster ride it was. I mean, this was a film that still today inspires so many other filmmakers, from the editing to the storylines to the action to the cutscenes to the way things are just placed within even the narration itself. I mean, people are still imitating to this very day. So it goes to show how if you ever want to make an impression with whatever field you're in, try out new things. That's essentially what this film did, and then it was able to become an instant classic on there too. As I mentioned in one of my other posts as well that I dedicated to this video, I always wonder if actors and filmmakers ever know if the thing they're filming right at that moment will be an instant classic. If somewhere along the lines, 30 years later, people are still quoting that particular scene, I'm wondering if these filmmakers ever know that that's going to happen. You know, it's a nice little way of thinking to themselves if this is going to be a classic. But the reason I think that Goodfellas became such a classic is this. It's the first real way that this was a gritty version of showcasing the world of the mafia. I mean, before then, it was pretty much stuff involving The Godfather. Like, people would think about those films, and they would see those high-end meetings that the Dons would have with each other with the fancy clothing and the fancy locations. Nothing in terms of the street level. Well, here, this film was definitely in it. Here you got to see the crew associated there in the film, all of them pretty much doing their day-to-day, if you could call them jobs there on the street level. There they were doing robberies here and there, in other cases doing murders, and there they were just collecting money and then trying to extort other things as well. This was pretty much the first time that you got to see actual street level action there in the world of the mafia, at least on film, that I could think of, at least when it came to a film this big. And of course, there you had some of the top name actors and a top director presenting that as well in a very, very memorable way. And then all the other films that came out afterward pretty much harken back to this one when it comes to showcasing all these locations and all these circumstances that are, again, street level wise. So that's why I think this film is such a classic, because nothing really like it was before. And I was reading somewhere in the past that I think it was Scorsese, where he was reading the book, the same one that I read, that was called actually Wise Guy. A lot of people don't know that, but the book that it's based on is not called Goodfellas. It's called Wise Guy, and he was reading it, and he too was hooked at the world that was presented there. You never saw this stuff in other type of films before, so it was a great way to be able to showcase that here. And then that's the book that I read too. As I was just mentioning, I also ended up listening to the audiobook, even though it was the abridged version. Abridged meaning it cuts out a lot of things from the actual book itself. It's a great way to go into that world specifically, and it's almost narrated by Henry Hill himself. You'll get to hear all of his circumstances in more detail as well, that go far beyond what the film ever showcased. So if you have a chance, if you haven't read the book or listened to the audiobook, I do highly recommend it, because if you're a fan of the film, then essentially you'll get to see, at least in your mind, a lot of behind-the-scene things happening that the film never had a chance to showcase, and you'll get to meet a lot of the more characters associated with that film. In fact, I was going to mention this too. I ended up going, after watching this film and then getting involved with a lot of readings of articles associated with it, I ended up going into these deep rabbit holes involving a lot of the real world circumstances of this film. I mean, some of the characters there are all very, very memorable. You've got, of course, Henry Hill himself, who was played by Ray Liotta. Then you have Tommy DeSimone, who was played by Joe Pesci. Paul Vario, who was played by, his name escapes me right now. I'll think back of him, Savara, I can't remember his name, and then Jimmy Burke, who was of course played by Robert De Niro. So all of these people all had real life characters that they based their characters on in the film. They had to strip away some of the names, and they had to change things for liability purposes, but still they were based on real characters. And so I started going into some of those rabbit holes, and then finding out, where did this stuff happen? Like, for example, the Lufthansa heist, the infamous one, the one where they were able to steal all that money. That ended up actually being several $1 million more than they anticipated. I mean, the character, the real life Jimmy Burke, when he saw this stuff, he instantly realized that this was going to take things to a whole other level when it came to involvement from the FBI and involvement from the police. And so I ended up trying to find some of those locations online to see where they occurred. It was fascinating. You got to see this stuff, like the real things. And then I found articles online as well highlighting it at the time when it occurred and how it was mystifying things, but already they were finding out that, it was narrowing it down to the Burke crew because of the circumstances surrounding it. And then I also ended up going to other rabbit holes involving other locations, like Robert's Lounge, which was the infamous lounge where Jimmy Burke and some of the others would hang out all the time, and they would talk about certain things there. In fact, it turns out that I was reading in one article that they were bugged all the time. Like, they would have stuff there from surveillance and FBI and so on, but they would turn up the music so loud there that it was very, very hard to discern anything, like in terms of things being intelligible. And so I think that was done also on purpose to ensure that stuff wasn't being tracked or monitored by others out there. And even minor characters, I started going to rabbit holes there, like Samuel Jackson's character, Stax. I started finding out more things about him, and it's true, it's real. Like, he ended up leaving that van, essentially, in a location that was found after the Lufthansa heist, and that ended up being his doom when it came to him being killed afterward. And then Martin Krugman, who ended up also being killed because of his insistence about trying to get his portion of the money. That's real. That was in real life, too. And then I ended up finding pictures of him, how he looked like in real life as well. And then, of course, Spider, who started off again this series here. I ended up going into a rabbit hole there as well, trying to find more on what happened to him More on that too in a minute, because I'll include it as a special bonus towards the end here of this video. And then also trying to find more information on Billy Batts, because others have mentioned about me trying to do a video on him as well. So this film essentially had me go and spend so many hours after I finished watching it. Not only that, but watching it several times. This is one of those films where if you see it on TV or if you see it streaming somewhere, you just have to pop it in again and relive it and watch all those wonderful moments again play on the screen. But yeah, this film had me go into so many other areas, quite unlike any other film out there. I can't recall anything like that as far as me being so knee deep into finding out all the details tied to certain characters and circumstances and locations and actions, stuff like that. So this is the kind of film and the impact that it had essentially on me. Not only that, but these memorable characters all had quotable quotes. I mean, who can forget that memorable line that I mentioned earlier in the film about wanting to be a gangster, and then funny how, and then what's right is right, that kind of stuff. So this is why this film has lasted so long too, because inadvertently the way that these guys talked and the way they had those particular scenes play out, they ended up creating some of the most memorable lines ever. And that's why it has lasted this test of time. Even today, as far as pop genre, there's these memes that you see, like Ray Liotta's character, Henry Hill, the way his surprised look is pretty much used as a meme to this day for other circumstances. That goes to show again just how popular that thing is. And then of course you had other things like Goodfellas, that was that Animaniac show that was really, really neat. That was really funny too. That one also ended up being something that was obviously like a dedication to this particular film, but it ended up going in other circumstances as well. But that was really, really funny to be able to do that too. But yeah, as far as this particular movie itself, it's celebrating 30 years. What a nice 30 years when it comes to this film having such an impact back then, the way it is today as well. I mean, you tell me, like, whenever you saw this film, post it in the comments below. Let me know, did it make that kind of same impact on you as it did to me? If so, let me know what your story is. Please post it below. I'd love to be able to hear that kind of story as well. And then let me know too how many times you've seen it, if you've gone into those other wormholes that I mentioned earlier, as far as those rabbit holes and so on. Paul Sorvino, that's his name. That's the guy, Paul Sorvino, the actor. He's the one that played Paul Vadio when it came to the film itself. So I knew I'd remember his name, but yeah, that's essentially what it was. And then the little bonus that I wanted to mention too was this. Check out these pictures here. Again, this ties back to Spider, the very first video that I did here in the Mafia Gangsters. So in the first pic, you're looking at the basement of Robert's Lounge. Again, this was the bar that Jimmy Burke and others used on a heavy basis. Well, in this picture, I ended up finding some history on it. This was right after the Lufthansa heist. When that occurred, of course, the police started to suspect his crew. Like I mentioned earlier, the FBI did as well. And so they decided to do a raid into that location. Well, it showcases the basement, and they didn't find anything. Obviously, Jimmy Burke and others would have taken care of the situation to make sure that nothing shows anything incriminating. So you'll see the police there with him, and then he's looking around and showcasing them everything there. Well, as it turns out, this is the actual basement that Spider was killed. This was it. This is the spot. And so the police there would have had no idea. The detectives there, they would have no clue about what had happened to Spider, because they wouldn't have known that he was killed who knows how far back when in that same location. So if you ever wanted to see the exact spot, the exact area where Spider was infamously killed by Tommy DeSimone during that argument that they had that was so perfectly and memorably played in the film itself, this is the spot there. How about that, right? When it comes to a little bit of trivia associated with that, this is the actual location where Spider was killed. And then look at this next picture here. This is the back area of the location, Robert's Lounge. In the book there from Henry Hill, he highlights there's a part there where they ended up burying several bodies within that location. In fact, they buried them, and then they would still, like you can see there, like they would have their normal daily activities on top of those burials. And in certain parts, he stated that they would play bocce ball. And then when they would do so, they would walk by in those areas that those bodies were built, that were buried in, especially with Spider. And in an almost toying fashion, they would say, "Hey, Spider, how you doing?" They would wave hi to the ground because that's where essentially where he was buried. So if you wanted to see where Spider was buried after he was killed, you're pretty much looking at it now. Somewhere in that background there, that's where Spider was killed. That's where Spider was buried after he was killed. But then he was moved afterward. Once the police started to suspect that there were burials within the backyard there of Robert's Lounge, then that's when they ended up having to move the bodies elsewhere. Because sure enough, that's when the police came by and they were able to dig things up, trying to find more evidence, but they couldn't find it because it was too little too late. The bodies were gone. And nobody knows to this day still where Spider is. Nobody has any clue. I'm guessing that his body was probably just chopped, put into other places, like probably just mixed throughout, who knows, the labyrinth of New York City and how big it is and so on. Like it was probably just buried in multiple parts somewhere and never ever to be found. But at least here you're seeing the location where he was temporarily buried, and that was also apparently the burial location of Marty Krugman, the guy I was mentioning earlier who kept insisting on getting his share of the cut from the Lufthansa heist, but ended up getting killed because of it afterwards. So if you ever wanted to see those burial spots, you're looking at it now. So again, nice little bonus that I wanted to present here for all of my Mafia and Gangsters fans as a nice follow-up from my first video that I did for Spider. But yeah, again, Goodfellas, 30 years. Please post your comments below and let me know what kind of impact the film had on you. Are you a big fan of the film? Do you still watch it to this day? Have you gone into any of the other media as well? Please let me know. I'd love to hear what your comments are there too. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.